It was a light rain at the end of April in Austin, Texas. The kind that wasn't strong enough to make anyone run, but just enough to tighten the chest a little. Jonathan Reyes stood beneath the awning of Savannah Grove, one of the restaurants he had founded, watching the gentle drizzle fall through the air. A worn gray hoodie, faded jeans, sneakers with scuffed heels. No one would have guessed he was the owner of this place, and that was exactly the point. Savannah Grove had once been Jonathan's dream, a dream that started in the tiny kitchen of his mother's house, where food was the only language that connected their Mexican immigrant family. Now, 20 years later, that dream had become an empire. But the bigger it got, the further away it felt. Lately, Jonathan had sensed something was off. Not the revenue, not the reviews, but a strange coldness hidden between the lines of perfect reports. He decided to do what he always did when he felt disconnected from his roots. He went back to being a nobody. The glass door opened with a soft chime. No one at the front desk looked up as Jonathan stepped inside. A young host with a man bun stood behind the podium, eyes glued to his phone. An older waitress at the far end of the bar was polishing glasses, not paying attention to anyone. Jonathan walked straight to the table by the window, the kind reserved for those who weren't regulars. He sat down and wiped the fogged-up window with his sleeve. The atmosphere inside the restaurant was lively. The gentle clinking of silverware, quiet conversations, the rich aroma from the kitchen drifting in waves. Jonathan tried to feel it. He had once created this space, where a meal wasn't just food but an experience. But now it felt like just another expensive restaurant. He felt out of place. A waitress approached. Her smile was perfectly rehearsed. "Good evening. Would you like still water?" Still water's fine." Jonathan nodded, his voice low but steady. "I'll need a few minutes to look over the menu." She nodded and walked away without a second glance. Jonathan opened the menu. He knew every dish, every ingredient, but this time he read it through the eyes of an outsider. Then he heard two soft voices behind him, from the table 1 seat away. "Do you think he'll show up?" The voice of a young boy, innocent but trembling. "I don't know," another voice replied, firmer. "But Mom said this is the place he used to come." Jonathan instinctively held his breath. He? Who? He lowered his head, pretending to study the menu, but every sense he had was now tuned in to the conversation behind him. "We'll get in trouble if they find us." The first boy sounded increasingly anxious. "Just wait. If he's really here, I want to look him in the face." The second voice almost hissed. Jonathan's skin began to burn. That feeling, the one where you just know someone is talking about you, but you can't be sure, it rose like an undercurrent. A part of him wanted to turn around and ask, "Who are you talking about?" But another part screamed, "Stay quiet. Keep listening." Maybe this was a misunderstanding. And then the name came out. Mom said it was all his fault. If it weren't for him, she wouldn't have lost her job. We wouldn't have had to move to that miserable place. Jonathan nearly dropped the menu. He gripped the table, trying to steady his breath. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were talking about someone else. But deep down, he knew they weren't. "Mom said he stole all her work and threw her out," the older boy said coldly. "Do you think he'd care if we told him?" "I don't know, but I want to try. I want him to know. He took everything from us." Jonathan closed his eyes for a second, not from exhaustion, but to stop the panic from bursting out like a flood. The waitress returned with a glass of water. "Have you decided on your order?" Jonathan glanced quickly at the menu he hadn't really been reading. "I'll have the special of the day." "Great choice," she replied and disappeared. By now, Jonathan could no longer keep his composure. He tilted his head slightly, trying to listen without drawing attention. Every word hit like a blade. He never apologized. Mom said he even blocked her from finding another job. The younger boy's voice now trembled with emotion. "We just have to wait. Mom said if he has any conscience left, he won't hide." That sentence hit Jonathan like a punch in the face. Won't hide. He knew he had to do something. But what? He couldn't just walk over and ask, "Hey, are you talking about me?" He couldn't do that without blowing everything up. He looked around. No one was paying attention to him. No one recognized him as Jonathan Reyes, the founder of the entire Savannah Grove chain. And those two boys were looking for someone who might just be him. Jonathan took a sip of water, but his throat remained parched. He looked around again. The golden light inside the restaurant reflected off the glass windows, creating blurry images. A young couple had just walked in, greeted cheerfully with two complimentary glasses of Prosecco and an invitation to sit by the fireplace. Meanwhile, an elderly woman, probably in her 70s, stood awkwardly near the host stand. She wore a knit coat, held a small handbag, her eyes searching for someone to ask. No one came to help her. The host, scrolling on his phone, glanced her way, frowned, and turned away. A minute later, the elderly woman walked over to an empty table herself, pulled out a chair, and sat down. No one bothered to ask if she needed assistance. Jonathan frowned. Not at the woman, but at the system, at this restaurant, at himself. He had once promised everyone who came to Savannah Grove would be welcomed like family. Now indifference was operating like clockwork. No system error reported, because this had become the system. He noted it, just as he noted the shift in the boys' voices behind him. No longer just curious, but yearning for something, to be heard, to be acknowledged, to be answered. Jonathan sighed, feeling, for the first time, truly small in a place he had built with his own hands. He once thought of himself as the one with power, the one who created opportunities for others. But now he was sitting silently in one of his own restaurants, unrecognized, with two children, descendants of some mistake he had possibly long forgotten. Right behind him, carrying the scars of a decision he might have once believed was right, the rain outside hadn't stopped. Spring rain in Texas isn't violent, but it lingers. And just like the consequences we leave behind on the climb to the top, they simmer, they stretch out, and sometimes they come knocking just when you're not ready. He didn't know what he was going to do next. All he knew was he couldn't leave tonight without knowing the truth. Jonathan didn't touch the glass of water again, not because he wasn't thirsty, but because everything now felt stuck in his throat. He tried to appear calm, but his eyes involuntarily swept toward the table behind him, where the two boys were still whispering. The warm light cast their shadows on the wall, two slender figures, slightly hunched, as if the world was too big for them. The older one, probably the brother, had short, slightly curly black hair and wore a faded olive green hoodie. The younger boy, thinner, wore a baseball cap too big for his head, causing his ears to stick out more than usual. They couldn't have been more than 13 or 14, far too young to be carrying a burden this heavy. In their small, closed postures and their eyes, Jonathan saw something he could never forget. The same look his mother once had when she took him to fancy restaurants just to look, because they couldn't afford to eat. Back then, he made a promise. If he ever created a place called his restaurant, he'd make sure everyone felt like they belonged there. And yet what was happening right now, and those two boys, were living proof of the opposite. He stood up and walked toward the bar, positioning himself where he could observe the boys without being obvious. The same waitress was cleaning glasses. "Excuse me," Jonathan said gently, keeping his tone casual. "The two boys at the table near the window, do they come here often?" She glanced toward them, slightly wary. "No, I don't think I've seen them before." "Are they causing any trouble?" She shook her head and lowered her voice a bit. "No, just sitting there whispering. But is something wrong?" Jonathan smiled and shook his head. "Just curious." As she turned away, his smile faded instantly. He returned to his table, trying to listen again. And then, "Do you think if we told him the truth, he'd say sorry?" The younger boy's voice. "No, he doesn't owe us an apology. Mom needs justice." The older boy's voice, steady and firm. Justice. Jonathan felt his chest tighten as if something was crushing his heart. A name began to surface in his mind. Daniela Vega. He wasn't sure, but as soon as the name crossed his thoughts, something deep inside him winced. Daniela, the first sous-chef of Savannah Grove, a real talent, the one who had helped build those original signature dishes with him. But one day she left. No warning, no text, no turning back. He had chalked it up to a personal choice, and then he forgot. "Do something," a voice inside urged. Don't just sit and listen. Don't repeat what you did with her, staying silent when someone needed to be seen. For the first time in his life, Jonathan found himself without a plan. No script, no coordination. Just one path: get to the truth. He stood up, took a deep breath, and walked toward the table where the two boys sat. His footsteps felt heavier than usual. "Excuse me," he began, his voice soft, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. The boys startled. The older one braced against the table, ready to react. The younger shrank down in his seat. "I don't mean to intrude," Jonathan raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "I just overheard you might be looking for someone. Someone important." The older boy narrowed his eyes. "Why do you care?" Jonathan gave a faint smile and slowly sat down in the empty chair across from them. "Because I was once someone who needed answers, and no one ever came to ask me anything." The two boys exchanged a glance. "Who are you?" the younger one asked hesitantly. Jonathan replied without rushing. "My name is Jonathan. Jonathan Reyes." They froze. The older boy leaned forward, eyes wide. "Reyes? Jonathan Reyes?" Jonathan nodded. "That's right." Silence. Then, like a thunderclap, the older boy shot up from his seat. "It's you. It's really you. You're the one who destroyed our mom's life." The words weren't shouted, but they landed heavier than any scream. A few diners turned their heads, but quickly looked away. Modern society doesn't know how to handle truth this raw. Jonathan felt the blood rush to his face. "Our mom's name is Daniela Vega. She used to work here. And you stole everything from her, then disappeared like nothing happened. Daniela Vega." Now there was no doubt. The storm of memory began flooding in. Flashes of tense meetings, her signature four-layer carrot soup, their arguments over creative vision, and then silence. He didn't remember firing her. He didn't remember saying anything cruel. But he remembered not stopping her from leaving. And sometimes that alone is enough to kill someone's future. I want to meet your mother," Jonathan said, more serious than he had ever been. "Not to justify anything, but to understand. If there's anything you can tell me, please help me." The older boy was still trembling, but his eyes no longer burned only with rage. There was something else now. Something like the hope for a reason to believe. "Then come here," he said, scribbling an address on a napkin. "We live there. But if you're not really going to listen, don't come." Jonathan stared at the napkin as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. And then he nodded. "I'll be there." The air inside the restaurant suddenly thickened, as if someone had flung open a door leading straight to the past. Jonathan sat there facing the two boys staring straight at him. Their eyes weren't searching. They already knew the answer. They were just waiting for him to confirm the undeniable. "You are Jonathan Reyes, right?" the older boy asked, his voice steady, but brimming with restraint. The question floated as softly as breath, but hit Jonathan's heart like a punch. He could lie. He could let out a dry chuckle and say, "You've got the wrong guy." But those eyes, bright, deep, and sharp as blades, had already pierced through the hoodie, the worn cap, the calm, measured voice. Jonathan swallowed hard. "Yes, I am." The boys went silent. The younger one, who hadn't dared look up until now, clutched his older brother's sleeve. "So Mom was right," he whispered. "He really is still here." Jonathan glanced down at the table, as if the answer was hiding somewhere in the wood grain. He used to believe he was in control of everything. Right now he felt like a man sitting on a tightrope stretched over an abyss carved by a mistake he still didn't fully understand. "I don't know who your mom is," Jonathan said slowly, but without dodging. "But if I've done something that made you look at me like that, then something must have gone terribly wrong." The older boy, Tyler, narrowed his eyes. "You really don't remember?" Jonathan shook his head, his gaze sincere. "I don't. I remember a lot of people who worked with me. But if your mom left quietly, maybe I never understood why." "She didn't leave." Marcus, the younger one, spoke suddenly, voice trembling. "You pushed her out." Tyler turned to his brother, resting a hand on his shoulder. Then he faced Jonathan again. "Our mom's name is Daniela Vega. She used to be a sous-chef here. 10 years ago, everyone loved her. until suddenly they didn't. Daniela Vega. The name was no longer vague. It appeared clearly in Jonathan's mind like an old photograph, stripped of dust. Long black hair neatly tied under a kitchen scarf. A confident voice, sharp eyes, and the way she could taste a dish without needing a recipe, just listening to the flavor. She was part of the soul of the kitchen. He remembered one time Daniela argued fiercely over a French onion soup. Jonathan wanted to keep it traditional. She proposed a new smoked version. In the end, the restaurant served her version. Customers loved it, he remembered. But not enough. Tyler continued, his voice like a formal charge. You know the chili lime sea bass? The signature dish that made it into Southern Chef magazine in 2014? Jonathan nodded. Of course, it was hers. Tyler said each word like a hammer blow. She invented it, tested it, documented it, and you added it to the menu without her name. Then when she pushed back, she vanished from the menu. And then, from the industry. Jonathan froze. It didn't feel like an accusation. It felt like someone had cracked open a vault of painful memories he had locked away under years of busyness. Mom was rejected by 3 restaurants in 2 months after that, Marcus added, his fingers tightening around a fork. They said she had collaboration issues. They never said your name, but she knew. She said you might not have acted directly, but you had the power to make every door shut. Jonathan didn't respond. He couldn't. He was hearing about mistakes he never imagined he had made. He used to think he was fair, that in building Savannah Grove, those who did well would be recognized. But maybe he had just been the guy holding the mic, while quietly erasing others from the picture. Not intentionally, but unintentionally, can be even more dangerous. I want to meet your mother, Jonathan said again. I'm not coming to defend myself. I'm coming to listen and understand. Tyler looked him dead in the eye. If you're lying, she'll know. Jonathan nodded. I'm ready. Tyler pulled a scrap of paper from his pocket and scribbled an address in blue ink. Apartment 3B, Greenridge Complex, East Side. Jonathan took the note, folding it carefully as if it were a summons from his own past. I'm not sure she'll talk to you, Marcus said softly. I don't need a promise, Jonathan replied. I just need a chance. That moment, a middle-aged man who had once stood at the peak of success, now looking into the eyes of 2 children, hoping only to walk through the door of a memory he had once closed. Not with cruelty, but with silence. He remembered clearly the whiteboards in the kitchen, where new dishes were tested, and he used to write thank you notes to contributors. Sometimes he'd write, thanks to Chef Martin for the killer squid ink risotto, or whole team crushed it on the balsamic glaze today. But there was never a line for Daniela, not because she didn't deserve it, but because he once believed she was too good to need the praise. Now Jonathan saw just how dangerous that belief had been. The same way people always forget to thank the one carrying the team, but reserve applause for the one who kicks the winning goal. You remember when she had to work 3 shifts in a row because the head chef got food poisoning? Tyler asked, reading Jonathan's thoughts. She cooked from 9 a.m. to nearly midnight. Every guest left satisfied. But in the end, the one who got mentioned in the review was you. Jonathan couldn't deny it. He remembered that day. The restaurant had earned a 5-star review from a major food blog, but in his memory it was just another exhausting shift. For Daniela, it might have been the moment she stopped believing hard work would ever be recognized. And when belief dies, people don't leave right away. They fade layer by layer, like leaves blown away by the wind, without a sound. Marcus looked at him, voice small but sharp as a knife. Mom used to say you didn't try to hurt her. You just never thought she was important enough to protect. That line shook Jonathan more than any accusation could. It was true. Maybe he hadn't deliberately pushed Daniela out, but his biggest mistake was silence. Not standing up, not using his position to shield the people who mattered when they got swept away by the very storm of success he had been riding. He once thought opening a door was enough, but doors aren't locked with keys. They're locked with the way we look away when someone's being left behind. Jonathan took a long breath. He used to walk out of the kitchen every night thinking he was a leader, someone who helped others chase their dreams. But tonight he would leave not as a leader, but as a man learning how to be human again. Not with slogans, not with speeches, but by knocking on the door of someone whose life he had once thrown off track. Not with violence, but with silence. The Greenridge complex sat on the east side of Austin, far from the city's glitzy restaurants and the clinking of wine glasses between investors sealing deals. Jonathan couldn't remember the last time he'd stepped into a neighborhood this worn. The sidewalks were cracked, grass overgrew between parked aging cars, and the rusted front gate groaned open as if it, too, was tired after years of being forgotten. He knocked on the door of apartment 3B. A faint bark sounded from inside, then silence. Jonathan nearly thought no one was home until the door creaked open. Tyler looked at him, didn't greet him, just stepped aside quietly to let him in. Marcus sat on the sofa, holding a remote without turning on the TV. The apartment was small but tidy. On the shelves sat old family photos, a few unlit candles, and a small cactus by the window. In the dim light, a woman appeared. Jonathan recognized her instantly, despite the gray strands in her hair and a tiredness in her eyes he had never seen before. Daniela Vega. He almost didn't dare breathe, not because she had changed so much, but because he had forgotten her for too long. "Jonathan Reyes," she said, her voice neither cold nor warm. "I didn't think I'd see you again. At least not here." Jonathan stood still. He didn't know where to begin, and she didn't help him. "Come in," she said after a short pause. "I don't have wine, just tap water and instant coffee." "Thank you," Jonathan replied, stepping in, feeling as if he had entered sacred ground he didn't deserve to touch. He sat in the chair across from her. Daniela didn't speak, didn't smile. She just looked at him. That look, he had seen it before. When she'd taste a dish still missing something, then say bluntly, "It lacks soul." "What are you here for?" she asked, voice steady. Jonathan took a breath. "To listen, to understand, to apologize if that's what's needed." Daniela raised an eyebrow. "If? Because I'm not sure how I was wrong. Just, your son spoke to me, and I realized I had to find out." She gave a soft laugh, dry, like smoke. No joy in it. "You're still the same," she said, "always showing up after everything's over. Always starting with, 'I don't remember.'" "I'm sorry," Jonathan said quickly. "Not because you need to hear it, but because I need to say it." Daniela leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "Do you remember the smoked chili lime cod? The one that got you that Modern Taste interview?" Jonathan nodded. "Of course. I thought we developed that dish together." "Number you thought. That dish was mine. Do you know how many times I tested it? 12. I recorded every adjustment, but when the winter menu came out that year, only your name was there." She stood up and went into the bedroom. A moment later, she returned with a folded old magazine. Jonathan recognized it instantly. Modern Taste, December 2014. The cover headline read, "Jonathan Reyes, the mastermind behind this winter's menu." Below was a photo of him in the kitchen, his familiar smile, beside the cod dish, described as innovative, bold, refined, and unmistakably personal. No mention of Daniela, no footnote, no credit to the woman behind the creation. "Do you remember this?" Daniela asked, voice strangely gentle. Jonathan felt a heavy stone drop in his chest, not from embarrassment, but because he had truly forgotten, not on purpose, but with no reason not to forget, except that he'd never thought it mattered enough to remember. "Why didn't you say something?" Jonathan asked almost defensively. "I did say something," Daniela replied, "but you didn't listen, or maybe you just didn't care enough to hear." Silence. No words fit. The tiny apartment felt huge, stretched by the distance between two people who once stood shoulder to shoulder in a hot kitchen. "After I left," Daniela continued, "I applied to 7 restaurants. None of them hired me. A famous chef even said to my face, 'I don't hire people who've caused trouble for Jonathan Reyes.'" Jonathan looked away. He'd never ordered that. But he knew. One comment in the fine dining world could lock out someone's entire future. "I lost everything," she said, "not because I wasn't good, but because you had a voice, and you used it to stay silent." Jonathan had nothing left to say. He bowed his head. "I don't need an apology. Daniela said after a moment. I need a second chance. I want to cook again. I want to believe that my work won't be erased just because someone else holds the microphone. Jonathan looked up. Then, if I can, I want to give you that chance. Daniela didn't respond right away. She simply stared at him, then turned away. We'll talk again another time, she said quietly, if you're still willing to listen. Jonathan stood, feeling unsteady on his feet. This small apartment had no leather chairs, no golden lighting, no symphony of clinking pans and fine aromas like he was used to. But it was the most exposed he had ever felt. As he turned toward the door, his eyes caught something on the wall behind the sofa, a photo frame. He stepped closer. It was a picture from the first year Savannah Grove opened. Jonathan, Daniela, and 6 others stood side by side, arms around each other, smiling brightly. But something made his heart drop. His face in the photo had been covered by a small square of gray sticker, pasted neatly, but unmistakably on purpose. He didn't ask. He didn't need to. The photo said everything. Daniela approached from behind, her voice calm. I was going to throw it away, but then I thought, that wouldn't change anything. So I kept it, to remind myself, never believe that doing good work is enough. Jonathan turned, their eyes met. No hatred, just distance, built by a decade of unnamed injustice. I used to think, Jonathan said softly, that as long as I didn't intend harm, I couldn't be a bad person. That's the trap for people in power, Daniela replied. You think indifference is neutral, but to those underneath, it's a punch in the gut. He nodded slightly. Then why didn't you speak louder? You're talented. You could have sued, or written about it, or… Daniela gave a bitter smile. Do you know how many women of color there are in fine dining? How many of them are allowed a voice? How many spoke up and got labeled difficult or unstable? I never lacked talent, Jonathan. I lacked armor. And I once thought you'd be the one to provide it. He looked down. No protest. He understood better than anyone how this industry worked. Silence equals complicity. Daniela walked to a shelf, pulled out a small box, and handed it to him. I kept this, not out of sentiment, but because it was once a promise. Jonathan opened the lid. Inside was a worn leather recipe notebook. He recognized her handwriting. Neat, annotated, underlined notes like retry salt ratio or don't pair with king oyster mushrooms. Dull's heat base. Among the pages, one was marked with a scrap of lace fabric. It read, dish, smoked chili lime sea bass, trial number 4. Notes, add Mexican chili paste, reduce black pepper to avoid masking base heat. Send to Reyes on Friday. Jonathan felt like someone was gripping his throat. His name was in the book, not for credit, but for collaboration, to taste, to refine, to create together. And then, he let his name stand alone in the spotlight. I can't change what happened, Jonathan said, voice low and almost trembling. But if you'll let me, I want to make right what I still can. Daniela didn't answer immediately. She looked at him for a long time, then said, like someone who had lost all expectations but still had enough heart to try again, you won't get a third chance. I don't need one. Just this one is enough, Jonathan replied. She gave a slight nod. I'm not promising anything, but if you still want to listen, come back next week. I'll tell you then, if there's anything left to save. Jonathan nodded, knowing he had no right to ask for more. He left the apartment, carrying the notebook, not as a trophy, but as a quiet indictment of everything he had ignored. The rain had stopped, but inside Jonathan, a new storm had just begun. A week later, Jonathan returned to the Greenridge apartment complex. There was no rain that day, but the wind blew in sharp waves, just enough to make him pull his coat tighter. In his hand was a small paper bag. Inside, a simple gift, a jar of smoked sea salt, the kind Daniela used to use in her dark base recipes. Not to buy forgiveness, just a quiet way to say, I remember. The door to apartment 3B opened after the second knock. Not Tyler, not Marcus. This time it was Daniela herself. She wore a loose gray sweater, her hair neatly tied back, and in her hand was a skillet towel that still smelled faintly of scallion grease. You really came back, she said, half acknowledging, half testing him. You said if I still wanted to listen, Jonathan replied. She stepped aside, letting him in. The apartment was warmer than last time. The scent of ginger lingered in the air, and soft jazz hummed from a small radio in the corner. She pointed toward the dining table. Have a seat. I just made something for the boys. You're welcome to join if you don't mind. Jonathan sat down and pulled the jar of salt from the bag, placing it gently on the table. I brought this, not because I think you need it, but because I still remember the way you created magic from just a pinch of this stuff. Daniela looked at the gift but said nothing. She didn't push it away. Moments later, she stepped into the bedroom and returned with something familiar, the leather-bound recipe book. This time, she didn't open to the middle. She handed it directly to Jonathan. He took it, and then he saw it. The cover, torn at the lower corner, smudged by old water stains, now held only one remaining line of text. J. Reyes, Signature Series. Daniela sat across from him. That was when I realized, when something that used to be ours is now just a name, maybe it's time to walk away. I once thought about burning it, but I kept it. Maybe to remind myself, not to place hope in someone who never saw me as a partner. Jonathan didn't argue. He stared at the journal as if it contained every mile of the road he had failed to walk, every person he had once stood beside without really seeing them. I didn't come today to apologize again, he said softly. I came to ask you, if I created a new role at Savannah Grove, one with full creative authority, the ability to launch a menu under your own name, with your photo, your story, told truthfully, would you be willing to come back? Daniela leaned back. Not surprised, she had been thinking about this all week. You really think they'll just let it go? People love you, Jonathan. The media, the young chefs, the investors. If I return, I'll reopen wounds they've tried hard to forget. I don't need them to want it. I need them to know that it's not just the successful who deserve to be named, but also those who were forgotten and chose not to hate. Daniela looked at him. Her eyes softened just slightly for the first time. Do you know what I lost? Not just a career, she said, but the ability to live in my passion without fear. Fear of being stolen from, fear of being labeled difficult, fear that every time I speak up, I'll be pushed to the edges. She paused, voice lower. I once dreamed of opening a restaurant with my name on the sign, but now I just want to cook and know that the food is mine, that it won't be renamed, recolored. Jonathan nodded. I won't take credit from you again. Not this time. I just want to stand behind you, in every sense of the word. Daniela looked at him, then down at the notebook. Her fingers gently brushed the torn leather where his name was still faintly imprinted. One condition, she said. If I return, the first dish on the new menu will not be the smoked sea bass. I've moved past that. I want to begin with something entirely new. Do you have a name for it yet? Jonathan asked, half teasing. Daniela gave a faint nod. It's called a second flame. He smiled softly, deeply. I think that'll be the first dish where they remember your name before they even ask about mine. She didn't smile, but she didn't refuse either. She simply said, let me choose the kitchen team. Who do you want? He asked. The ones they called backup, the ones they judged for learning slow, speaking English with an accent, or for looking like me. Jonathan understood instantly. He stood, not to leave, but to signal. I'm ready. Daniela placed the notebook back on the table, but this time, she didn't place it face down. Jonathan glanced around the tiny kitchen in the apartment's corner, the old electric stove, the neatly arranged jars of spices, the Mexican-patterned tablecloth he guessed had been kept for years. He stepped closer and spotted a hand-carved wooden cutting board, its surface marked by worn knife lines, and a small jar labeled, Smoked Paprika since 2013. You kept this? He asked, gently touching the spice jar. I keep what never betrayed me, Daniela replied without turning around. Jonathan gave a quiet, wistful smile. This kitchen wasn't glossy, but there was something in it that reminded him of his mother's old kitchen, where every meal was a small celebration, no matter how cramped or poor. A place where passion survived, even without applause. From the hallway, Tyler stepped in, leaning against the wall, watching his mother, His voice carried both wariness and curiosity. "You're really going back, Mom?" Daniela turned to him and nodded gently. "But this time, I choose the path." Marcus followed behind. He stayed quiet for a few seconds, then asked softly, "What if they steal your work again?" Daniela walked over, sat beside him, and gently held his shoulder. "If that happens again, I won't be alone, and I won't be silent." The answer caught in Jonathan's throat. He used to think that if someone didn't speak up, they didn't need help. Now he understood. Sometimes people don't speak because every time they tried, they were crushed. Daniela turned to him. "You know, in 2017, Chef Lyman, the one famous for his Chicago restaurant chain, offered me a partnership, a life-changing opportunity, and I said no." "Why?" Jonathan asked, genuinely surprised. "Because I knew if I stepped into that kitchen, I'd have to carry a version of myself that had once been erased. I didn't want to cover up the scars in a new place. I wanted a kitchen where people knew who I was from the beginning, not the rescued woman, but the forgotten one who walked back in on her own." He said nothing, but his hand clenched gently, not in anger, in respect. "And now," Daniela said slowly, "if you're willing not to stand in front, but beside me, not to instruct, but to listen, then maybe, for the first time, I'll finally feel like I'm home." Jonathan nodded, voice deep. "Then come home, and I'll be the one holding the door." Jonathan sat in the corner of his office at Savannah Grove headquarters, leaning back into a leather chair, eyes locked on the laptop screen displaying the old employee records. Search, Daniela Vega. No results, no notes, no resignation records, no official trace. She had vanished from the system as if she never existed. He dug through layers of old data, email threads, payroll sheets, staff logs. Still nothing. Everyone who had helped him launch the first restaurant had a file, comments, even commemorative photos. But Daniela, nothing but a void. Jonathan wondered how someone who had stood by his side for nearly 3 years could be erased so completely. And the answer, though he didn't want to admit it, was himself. Because he didn't protect her, didn't mention her, didn't preserve her name in the system. That afternoon, he returned to apartment 3B, carrying a large envelope. Inside was a draft of an honorary partnership contract, the description reading, "Position, co-head chef, independent creative authority, full recipe publishing rights, shared authorship of special menus." Daniela wasn't surprised when he handed her the document. She didn't rush to sign it. She simply placed it on the table and sat across from him. "Did you find my file?" she asked evenly. Jonathan nodded. "There isn't one. You disappeared from the system." She gave a faint laugh. "No surprise. When a system no longer needs you, it erases you, without warning." "I don't remember signing off on your dismissal," he said honestly. "I don't remember anything." "People in power like you usually don't," she replied. "Not because you're cruel, but because for you, it was just another day. For me, it was the day every door shut." Jonathan swallowed hard. He had always believed that not remembering proved innocence. Now he saw it for what it was, a confession of apathy, sugar-coated in plausible deniability. "I applied to 5 restaurants after that," Daniela said. "Some rejected me the moment they heard my name. Others accepted my application, then disappeared after learning I'd worked at Savannah Grove." "I never told anyone to do that," Jonathan muttered. "You didn't have to. All they needed was to see that you never spoke up for me, never defended me, never made a single phone call." Jonathan sat in silence. "In this industry, silence was the most dangerous form of consent." She continued, "Do you remember when I made the beetroot gnocchi, the first vegetarian dish ever added to the main menu?" Jonathan nodded slightly. "It was excellent. That day, the head chef told me you were going to credit me on the menu. But when the printing came out, only your name was there." Jonathan frowned. "I didn't think that was intentional." Daniela cut him off. "You didn't think, and that's the problem." He straightened up, looking her directly in the eye. "Do you want me to sign this contract with you?" she asked. "No," Jonathan said. "I want you to sign this contract with yourself." She narrowed her eyes, confused. "I'm just the facilitator. But your name, your dish, Your voice? This time, they won't go through me. I'm just the one opening the door, not the one choosing who gets to walk in." Daniela looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood and went into the bedroom. When she returned, she carried a worn yellow envelope, frayed at the corners. On it was written in ink, "To Daniela Vega, return if undeliverable." She set it on the table. "I wrote a complaint to the Texas Culinary Board in 2015. Never sent it. I was afraid. I told myself I'd send it if you denied everything. But now, maybe I don't need to. I'll sign, but I have one condition." "Anything," Jonathan said. "When I return, everyone needs to know. Not through a press release, not through an expose, through the kitchen. I want to cook the first dish in front of the entire team, including those who've never even heard my name." "That's more than fair," Jonathan said. She smiled for the first time, a real smile. "Then prepare yourself. This flame won't light up the past. It'll cook the future." When Jonathan left the apartment that day, he didn't look back. He knew if he did, he might see Tyler and Marcus watching from the window. And for the first time, he didn't care what he looked like through their eyes. He cared about the shadow he had left behind. Back at his office, he placed the signed contract on his desk. Not to brag, but to reread it, like a moral pact. The bolded clause, "We acknowledge full creative ownership, public attribution, and publishing rights belonging to Chef Daniela Vega for all recipes executed under this collaboration." Jonathan thought back to those early startup years. Standing in the cramped kitchen of their first location, still wearing his chef's hat, gripping a knife, sweat dripping onto the grill. Back then, every dish was a team effort. But when the press came, the one giving the speech was always him. "You speak well," Daniela once told him back then. "Shame the food can't talk." He had laughed, not realizing how deep that line would cut years later. Jonathan walked down the hallway toward the boardroom, lined with framed photos from the restaurant's history. He stopped at the picture labeled Savannah Grove Kitchen Crew, 2014. About 15 people stood in the shot. He was in the center, the head chef to his right, and to the left, one person partially obscured by a digital spotlight effect added during post-production. Black hair, holding a ladle. It was Daniela. And then he realized that wasn't an accident. The photo had been selected by the media team, and the light pillar was digitally added to highlight the founder's face. From softly erasing someone in a photo to removing their name from a menu, everything had always been done so smoothly that no one protested. But that smoothness was how power operates, without ever raising its voice. Jonathan returned to his office, looked again at the signed contract. He picked up a pen and added one final note at the top corner. "If the system once silenced you, let this be the first place that listens to you in full." The day Daniela returned to Savannah Grove wasn't marked by ceremony. There were no banners, no flashing lights, no reporters invited. Jonathan knew, and Daniela knew even better, that true returns don't need fanfare. The restaurant opened at 4 p.m., as usual, but in the kitchen, the team paused at exactly 3:30 for an emergency meeting. Jonathan stood in front of the 12 kitchen staff, none of whom had ever worked with Daniela, except for one older dishwasher named Manny, who used to call her La Maestra, the teacher. When Daniela entered, no one recognized her right away. She wasn't wearing a chef's uniform, no hat, just a plain white button-up shirt, dark khaki pants, and a Mexican hand-woven cloth tied softly around her wrist. A quiet nod to her roots. No one clapped, no one cheered, and she didn't smile. Jonathan spoke first. "I want to introduce someone to you. This is Chef Daniela Vega. She's not new to this kitchen, but for most of you, it's the first time you're meeting the person who helped build the foundation for the menu you serve every day." A few eyes darted sideways. Manny gave a slight nod. Daniela stepped forward. "I'm not here to talk about the past," she said plainly. "I'm here to start again. But I won't start unless I have full creative authority." A faint scoff came from a young intern by the ovens. "What are you trying to do? Change the whole menu?" Daniela looked him straight in the eye. "Not change. I want to write a new chapter." She raised her hand and placed a new black notebook on the counter, no name on the cover. This is where I'll log the dishes, one per week, and each dish will carry the name of its creator. Not the Savannah Grove team, not Jonathan Reyes Presents, a real name. Jonathan said nothing. He knew this was what she had waited her whole life to do, to attach her name to what she created without it passing through someone else's hands. And I won't wear the white chef coat anymore, the one that made me invisible among the men. The kitchen went silent. Daniela looked at each of them. I don't need you to believe in me right away, but I need you to taste what I make. If you think it's good enough, join me in making it again. If not, I'll walk. The side door opened and two boys entered, Tyler and Marcus, no longer standing in the background, no longer whispering. Our mom used to teach us to cook over canned heat stoves, Tyler said loudly, because we couldn't afford to use the gas. All eyes turned toward him. She cooked every night, no matter how tired or upset she was, because food was the only way she knew to keep our family from falling apart. Marcus followed, voice trembling but firm. If our mom doesn't deserve to stand here, then who does? No one answered. Jonathan stepped out from the group and walked toward Daniela, extending his hand. I'm not standing in front of you, he said. I'm standing beside you. Daniela nodded, not taking his hand, but answering with her gaze. She turned to the kitchen. My first dish won't be something old. It'll be something I've never dared to make before. An appetizer with no oven, no knives, only hands. Wait, what? A line cook asked, surprised. To remind everyone, she said, that food doesn't need gear, fame, or fire. It just needs feeling. Then she added, the dish is called Raw Truth. The kitchen fell silent. A few lips curled, not mocking, but skeptical. Daniela didn't flinch. She glanced at the overhead lights reflected through the mirrored backsplash, seeing herself, unfiltered, behind no one. But not everyone was at ease with that. In the far corner of the kitchen, executive chef Darren Collins, the current head chef, promoted by Jonathan from sous-chef, stood with arms crossed, silent, his face unreadable, but the twitch at the corner of his mouth said it all. He felt threatened. After the meeting, Jonathan approached him. You all right? Jonathan asked, keeping his tone neutral. Collins didn't look at him. I thought we were a team, but now it seems every team needs a new lead character. There is no lead character, Jonathan replied softly. Just an old story that needs to be retold, with all its chapters. Collins shrugged and walked off. Not loud, but the way he tossed his gloves into the trash said enough. A storm was brewing in the kitchen. Daniela saw it all. She walked slowly toward the prep station and began laying out ingredients for Raw Truth. Thin sliced raw eggplant, white miso honey glaze, purple basil, fermented chickpeas, and cold-pressed olive oil. Everything served on a wooden board. No knives, no heat, no flames. A curious young intern stepped closer. You're really going to serve it like that? Uncooked? Uncooked, Daniela said, because truth doesn't need to be reheated. It only needs to be plated well enough that no one can deny it. The boy scratched his head. I've never seen anyone do this. Then today you'll be the first. Outside, the late afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting silver light across the stainless steel counters. Daniela looked toward Jonathan, still there, not intervening. I don't need someone beside me every step, she said, but I need to know. If I trip, that person won't laugh. Jonathan nodded gently. This time, I'm not just beside you, I'm clearing the path. She didn't smile, but in her eyes something softened. Not trust yet, but the beginning of something being rebuilt from old ashes. That afternoon, Daniela completed Raw Truth. She placed it on the presentation table, a paper-thin slice of eggplant, rolled gently with fermented sauce, topped with a single drop of golden oil. The dish looked almost invisible, but one bite brought layers, umami, sweet, then a whisper of bitterness at the end, leaving the kitchen silent. No applause, no outcry, just silence. But this time, a different kind. The kind of silence people sit in when they're learning how to taste again. Savannah Grove, Wednesday, the third week since Daniela Vega officially returned to the kitchen. No articles were published, no interviews scheduled, Not a single post on the restaurant's social media accounts mentioned her, but the menu had already begun to change. The attentive would notice a small corner of the menu labeled "From the Edge," once reserved for a single bland experimental item, now carried a new subtitle, "Guided by the hands of one who was silent for far too long." No name. No need for a name, because anyone who had tasted it knew. This dish wasn't like anything that had ever been served here before. In the first week, customers still gravitated toward the familiar: green pepper steak, pomegranate glazed salmon, black cream pasta. But then a tweet appeared, unexpected and quietly seismic. I ordered the wild root terrine on my server's recommendation. At first, I just wanted to snap a fun story, but after the first bite, I stopped. I don't know who made it, but it felt like someone who's been hurt was comforting me through layers of beetroot. It was retweeted 9,400 times within 48 hours. 2 days later, a local food journal published an unofficial review. Savannah Grove quietly introduces human flavor into its menu, and people are whispering about it. Daniela read the article after her shift, not from a glossy magazine, but from Marcus's phone screen. They're writing about you, Mom, he said, eyes wide with awe. She smiled faintly. I don't need them to write. I just need you to taste a dish and ask, Mom, why does this taste like that day I got sick? That's enough. Inside the kitchen, the change was more visible than ever. Chef Collins, after days of silence, finally approached Daniela's prep station, where she was arranging pickled ginger and salt-roasted radish. He didn't apologize. She didn't expect him to. He simply said, I tried your fermented carrot panna cotta yesterday. It reminded me of something my mother used to make, though she never had a name for it. Daniela looked up. That dish doesn't have a name. Collins raised an eyebrow. Because some memories just need to be evoked, not labeled, she said. From that day forward, Collins stopped standing opposite. He started standing beside, quietly, much like Jonathan had been doing. That Friday, Jonathan invited the entire Savannah Grove media team into the kitchen, not to film, but to eat. Just sit and eat, he said. No cameras, no mics, no hashtags. At first, they thought he was joking, until Daniela stepped out with a dish not on any menu: grilled shrimp porridge with charred shallots and an apple brandy reduction. She said, this isn't trendy, it's not elegant, but it's what I made when there was nothing left in the fridge except a handful of rice and a frozen shrimp from the week before. The table fell silent as they ate. One of them, a young journalist who usually only wrote about French fine dining, began to cry midway through her bowl. I don't know why, she said, but I miss my mom. No one replied, but something spread like a ripple. The food wasn't just coming from a kitchen anymore. It was coming from memory. Daniela stayed late that night. She walked through the now dark kitchen, lit only by the soft yellow glow reflecting off wiped stainless steel counters. Manny, the dishwasher, was still there, drying a stack of knives. He looked at her and nodded. You know, when I first started here, nobody asked for my name. They just called me dishwasher. You were the first to ask who I was. Daniela paused. I don't remember that. You don't have to, Manny smiled. But I do. And this time, people will remember you. Not because of your name, but because your food made them put down their phones for 5 seconds. The next afternoon, as Daniela was finishing a dish called heritage rice with burnt lemon sauce, a blend of heirloom sticky rice and bitter lemon glaze, she overheard whispers behind her. A group of young staff were murmuring at the prep table. I thought only Reyes's dishes had this kind of flavor. Maybe it's a shared idea, but it doesn't feel like it's trying so hard like the old signatures. Daniela didn't respond. She simply did one thing, handed each of them a small spoon. Taste it. No compliments needed, just honesty. They tasted. One swallowed slowly. Another gave a quiet nod. The third said nothing, but walked back to his station and laid his knife back down. Perfectly aligned. In a kitchen, that gesture speaks louder than applause. It means, I acknowledge you. That evening, in the private dining section reserved for longtime patrons, Mr. Howard Easton, a loyal customer of over a decade, ordered the chili coconut broth, a new addition to the From the Edge menu. After his meal, he waved Jonathan over, who was checking a nearby table. "You've still got the magic, Reyes," he said warmly. "This broth reminds me of New Orleans, with a little something feminine." Jonathan smiled, but this time he didn't nod in thanks like he used to. "Thank you, sir, but that dish isn't mine." Howard squinted. "It's Chef Vega's," Jonathan added. "And if you liked it, I'll pass your words along. She's right there, in the kitchen." The man nodded slowly. "Vega, is she the one who—" "The one we forgot," Jonathan said, gently but clearly. "She's back now, and that dish, that's how she speaks." Howard didn't answer right away, but he left a handwritten note on the table before leaving. "I've eaten here for 11 years, but this is the first time I feel like someone is listening." At the end of her shift, Daniela washed her hands in the back sink. Tucked in a corner few employees even noticed. The harsh white light from the fluorescent bulb bounced off the running water, making her hands look thin, but steady. She scrubbed them longer than necessary, not because they were dirty, but because, for the first time in years, she felt like her hands were being seen, not hidden behind louder hands, not squeezed into white gloves just to match the uniform, not hired hands, but recognized hands. She turned off the faucet and dried them. In the mirror, her bare face stared back, tired but unmistakably present, and for the first time in years, she didn't look away. That day, the Austin sky held nothing special. No rain, no harsh sun, just a pale gray spread across the sky, like a blank backdrop waiting to be rewritten. And right at 11 a.m., a post appeared on Jonathan Reyes's official LinkedIn account. Savannah Grove would not be what it is without Daniela Vega. She was the unnamed soul behind many of the recipes that brought us success. And today I want to publicly acknowledge what should have been carved into our kitchen walls from the very beginning. No photo, no hashtags, no links. But within 2 hours, the post had been shared 32,000 times. In the kitchen, Daniela was guiding a new cook through the process of making steamed black bean tamales, a complex dish that required 72 hours of dough fermentation using koji mushrooms. Just then, Marcus burst into the kitchen, phone in hand, breathless. "Mom, you're online." Daniela frowned, wiping her hands as she took the phone. On the screen was a video, a behind-the-scenes interview clip recorded 2 weeks earlier by an independent food journalist, someone who had once tried her raw truth. In the video, Daniela sat in a folding chair outside the kitchen, wearing a simple white shirt, gently rubbing the woven cloth on her wrist. Her voice carried no anger, no drama, but each word felt carved from a scar. "People always ask me, why didn't you speak up earlier? Why didn't you sue?" And I just want to ask them. When you've stood in a kitchen for 12 hours a day, and when the dish finally gets printed, it carries someone else's name. Do you still have the strength to speak? There was a time I cried in the walk-in freezer because a guest called it a masterful creation by Chef Reyes. I wanted to protest, but I didn't know how to speak a language that wouldn't label me as difficult. That cut wasn't deep, but it bled every day. And when you no longer feel present, you start believing you were never there. The video lasted just 1 minute and 57 seconds. But the internet didn't need a second more to begin restoring her name. Within 24 hours, Savannah Grove's inbox received an email with the subject line, "Collaboration Proposal," from the Pine Table Restaurant, Portland. The content was simple. "We've been following Chef Vega's journey through the new Savannah Grove menu. If she's interested, we'd love to invite her to lead the opening of our second branch in Portland as executive chef, with full creative authority and full control over her team. No intermediaries, no need for validation. If she agrees, we'll fly to Austin to present the details." Jonathan was the first to read the email. He didn't smile. He didn't feel sad. He simply printed it, placed it in a white envelope, and left it on Daniela's prep station with a single line handwritten on the front. "I once took your voice. If you leave now, leave with your own." That evening, the entire kitchen team gathered to share a meal together, a tradition Jonathan had been trying to revive, but never had it been this full. Colin sat next to Manny. A young intern shared how he was rejected by another restaurant because of a psych file in his records. Daniela listened without interrupting, just occasionally placed a hand on someone's shoulder as they spoke. Then it was her turn. Has anyone here ever felt like a ghost in the kitchen? She asked. A few nodded. Then today, you sitting here, this is proof we exist. And we don't exist because of applause. We exist because of our hands, our flavors, the silence we once endured. Tonight, I don't need you to feel sorry for me. I just hope none of you will ever let the person beside you be erased from the story again. No one said a word, but for the first time, Colin's eyes softened. He raised his water glass and gave a quiet nod. Late at night, after everyone had gone home, Daniela sat alone in the kitchen, rereading the email invitation from Portland. She held it in her hands, eyes locked on the line. To Chef Daniela Vega. Her name, not attached to anyone else, not beneath someone else's shadow. For the first time in her life, she considered leaving, not to escape, but to begin. And if she left this time, people would know she had been there. The next morning, Jonathan's phone buzzed nonstop as he made coffee in his office. Messages poured in, from old colleagues, fellow chefs, even professors at the Texas Culinary Academy. All under one topic, Daniela Vega. One said, I used to think Reyes was the soul of Grove. Now I know the true soul was the one we forgot. Another wrote, I'm not just moved, I'm ashamed. Thank you for having the courage to write it out loud. Jonathan sat in silence, not because he mourned lost fame, but because for the first time in his life, he realized, to not be mentioned does not mean to be forgotten. Daniela had always been there, always, and now her name was sparking conversations, without needing him to translate. A ping sounded from his inbox. He opened it. It was an email from Harlan Kim, a veteran chef who had worked alongside Daniela back in 2013, and who had been promoted after she left. The email was short. Daniela, I once saw you cry in the freezer. I said nothing, not because I disliked you, but because I was afraid that speaking up would cost me my chance. Now I see, I lost much more. If you'll allow me, I'd like to apologize. Not with words, but by cooking beside you for a night, anytime. Harlan Jonathan didn't forward the email. He printed it, placed it next to the Portland contract. He didn't say a word, because this time, she deserved to see it all, with her own eyes. 1 week after Jonathan's viral post, Savannah Grove held a small internal gathering. No cameras, no press, no outsiders. Just the kitchen team, servers, managers, and a modest buffet table. Daniela walked in carrying a tray of black mushroom tamales, the same dish she used to secretly cook with a can of chafing fuel when her gas was cut off in her old apartment. Now it stood at the center of the table. No applause, but everyone waited for her to speak. She placed the tray down, looking around. Every face felt familiar, not because she had known them before, but because each one had once carried the same look she used to, when no one looked back. She didn't stand on a chair. She didn't use a microphone. She simply said, loud enough to be heard in the old kitchen walls. Once a chef asked me why I never filed a lawsuit. I said, because I'm not trying to reclaim what was lost. I'm trying to create what was never acknowledged. She glanced at Collins, the man who once stood in opposition. Now he nodded, not in agreement, but in recognition. She continued, I don't forgive to give others peace. I just refuse to let pain become my only possession. I turn it into an ingredient. No one said anything, but in that silence, a kind of shared warmth slowly spread. The next day, Daniela returned to the kitchen early, earlier than Manny. She went to the exact corner she had once been replaced in by a head chef she was never warned about. Now that corner had become the new menu test station, and the one assigned to oversee it was Tasha, the young intern who had once asked Daniela, you really don't need a stove to cook? Daniela wore a new chef's jacket, ash blue picked out by Marcus, and tied the checkered cloth around her wrist. She said, we'll start with a dish that doesn't require heat. Tasha blinked. That one again? Daniela nodded. Because you haven't tasted it with your mind yet. That afternoon, Jonathan entered the kitchen. He no longer felt anxious, only a sense of stillness, like someone freshly unbandaged after surgery. He approached Daniela and handed her an envelope. She opened it to find an invitation from the Global Independent Culinary Forum. We invite Chef Daniela Vega to speak at the Next Generation Food Summit in Seattle. Topic: the voices once silenced, and the dishes that speak for them. All travel and accommodations will be covered. Daniela folded the card and slid it into her coat pocket. She didn't say thank you, just nodded, because she knew gratitude should be saved for those who remembered you from the beginning. That night at home, Marcus asked, "So, are you going to Portland?" Daniela thought for a moment, then answered, "I will, but not to leave this place. I'm going to prove that someone who was once erased can start a new chapter, not for revenge, but to clear a path for those who follow." Tyler chimed in, "What about Savannah Grove?" "I'll come back, and I won't stand behind. I'll stand beside. And everywhere I go, I'll leave behind a kitchen corner, meant for the forgotten." A few months later in Seattle, Daniela stepped onto a stage in simple clothes. No blazer, no heels. The entire auditorium fell silent. No one really knew her, except for a 1-minute 57-second video and a series of dishes no one could quite replicate. She didn't read a speech. She simply said, "I used to be the one behind every plate. I was called overly sensitive, dismissed with politeness, erased elegantly. But today I don't need to shout, because my food speaks loud enough." And the whole room rose to its feet. 1 year later, in South Portland, a small restaurant opened with a simple wooden sign, Vega. No founder portrait, no fancy slogans, just a quiet line engraved beneath the sign, "For those who were never named." Inside, the kitchen wasn't large, but the lighting was warm. On the back wall was a whiteboard where every new dish was listed not by head chef name, but by note. Idea by Carla, first-year apprentice. Inspired by a dish my mom made in 2002. Completed by the whole team. Each dish there wasn't just the result of technique, it was an act of empathy. Daniela didn't work there every day. She traveled between cities, trade schools, local food collectives. Wherever there was a silenced chef, a little Vega corner might appear. A space where people cooked not because they had loud voices, but because they didn't need them. Back at Savannah Grove, Jonathan still ran operations, but his office no longer displayed personal portraits. Behind his chair, a large frame print of the original From the Edge menu page hung on the wall, with one handwritten note in ink. Every recipe, a silence broken. DV. Once in a vocational class in Chicago, a young girl stood up after class, her eyes glassy. "Chef Vega, why didn't you go bigger with this? If you'd exposed them, you'd be famous. People would have listened." Daniela smiled. "I don't need the crowd to hear me. I just need one person in a kitchen, looking at their dish, and no longer afraid of being erased. A flame, if it burns long enough, doesn't need to be tall. It just needs to be warm. Warm enough to heat someone, warm enough to stay lit, and Daniela Vega was still keeping the fire." If this story moved you, if you've ever known someone who was forgotten because they didn't speak loudly enough, like, subscribe, and share this video as an act of recognition. So more voices are heard, so more fires are kept burning. And if you believe in the power of quiet kindness, drop a comment below. I see you.